interview Björn and like guide the conversation towards him. And since he knows much more about his life than I do, I will let him set the stage for why I want to talk to him and why we want to sort of extract his Silicon Valley knowledge in this setting. So Björn, please.
Indeed. So the context being that I was part of starting one of the world's largest kids gaming companies called Toca Boca, and this took place largely in Silicon Valley, but started in Sweden originally. So we're going to share some of the learnings and the ideas, and I think maybe also a little bit of the context of how we ended up in this place. What are some ideas that we could extract from Silicon Valley, and maybe some areas where we did the opposite of maybe what you would have thought maybe was the traditional way of going about this as well. So I think to sort of take it back originally to get the idea of where's this coming from, why did this even happen from the beginning. We're in 2009 and living in Stockholm. I'm working at Bonnier, the large Swedish media organization. This is a 8th generation 175-year-old company which owns a lot of traditional media assets. Most of you probably heard of it. They do own books, magazines, newspapers, that sort of thing. At the time, I'm responsible for future media and technology in Stockholm, which basically means what's the future of books, what's the future of newspapers, which is an extremely ungrateful job because because it's essentially impossible to figure out, and even if you're right, nobody wants to listen to what you had to say. So my job was to go to all of these companies and tell them I think books is going to go in this direction, and they say very interesting, goodbye. And that was my job essentially. That's what I was doing. So I say this because this is the context how Toca Boca was formed inside of this behemoth. This is not a traditional startup. This is a research project that came out of a huge failure that we had just before. And the huge failure came of trying to digitize magazines to a higher degree. So Toca Boca sprang out of the idea that Bonnier had bought 3 very large magazine publishers in America at the absolute worst possible time in history, just before the financial crisis. They bought half of Time Inc., all the titles that you think of, not those, the other ones. Not Time and not Life or any of the good ones, but all the other titles. They bought all of them. They bought World Publications and something called Advance Publications, I think, something like that. So they bought all of these magazines, and then of course suddenly the financial crisis hits. It is a structural crisis because no one was super excited in magazines anyway, and a financial crisis at the same time. So in Europe you have about 50% revenue from advertising, 50% revenue from people buying it. In the US it's 95% advertising. So this is a absolute sort of atomic level disaster because all the money suddenly disappears. But they've already bought them. There's about 50 titles in America. So they asked the R&D team, which is where I worked, what do we do about this? and this is a very long story in its own right, and I won't do the whole thing. But essentially our job was, how do we then digitize these magazines that we just now bought to try to salvage some of the money that we just spent doing this? And long story short is we made a product, digital magazine prototype, because at this time the iPad shows up. And Bonnier as a company thinks this is fantastic. Perfect timing. It looks like a magazine anyway. We'll just take the magazine and we'll put it on top of it, and then the problem is solved. Needless to say, this does not work. It turned into a very cool sort of video, but nothing less. And then it's a huge failure, essentially, because no one really wants to read digital magazines, and still to this day, very few people want to read digital magazines because it's coming from the inverse way of innovation, which is like, what do we have and how would we want it to be, as opposed to what do real people actually want. So we're doing the complete opposite. We have all of these things anyway, so we might as well make something of it. The starting point of Toca Boca is when we start thinking the opposite. If they're not reading magazines, then what are they doing? And that's where this sort of story becomes. So let's put the magazines behind us and start thinking about what do people really do with these new devices, and where do we go from there?
Yeah, and I remember when we started talking about these things, you told me about this, the passback effect. Do you want to elaborate shortly on the passback effect?
Yeah, the passback effect came up in research when we were seeing what are people then doing, and one of the things that happened here was we read a research paper from the Joan Gans Cooney Center, which is the think tank connected to Sesame Street in the US. And the passback effect was this phenomenon, essentially, that they had observed, where parents take their device and they pass it back to the kids in the back seat of the car. Which means that children, for the first time, have a disproportionate access to an extremely good device because it's not theirs. They have, because they're borrowing their parents' devices, which at the time was a complete revelation. It's like, well, why? Normally, then, why would you buy a device for, say, $500, $600, $700? It's made out of glass, and give it to a 3-year-old. That seems insane. But that's exactly what people were doing. But they started in this kind of pillowy environment of a backseat of a car. And this was sort of, suddenly children could have access to a device which was much better, that wasn't bought for them, but they could play with it, which meant the touchscreen worked. And all of these sorts of devices and all the cool stuff that was in these devices suddenly worked. You would never have bought it for a kid then, you do now, but you wouldn't have done it at the time. Now they can use it. And this was sort of a change. Okay, what could kids be doing with these devices now that they actually have them, then, even if no one had thought that that was the case?
Yeah. And so this is the setting for the start, Toca Boca. And like my first experience with Toca Boca was that my eldest is born 2013, and like in a year or two, she started to be with her grandma. And they play these Toca Boca things on the iPhones. They have this, like, you know, do you know of the games? Like, it's like the thing you flush down things in the toilet. There's one where you have a tea party, where you just have a blanket and you rearrange things. And there's another one where you cut hair and stuff like that. And I mean, I remember when these things said Toca Boca. I mean, I know all these things, and I didn't know you, Bjorn. I didn't really think of that it was people who made these. It was just something which entertained a child. And it's really a part of childhood for many, and intergenerational play.
Yeah.
And when we got to know each other, and you like told me the whole story, which you will get more of today, I thought, like, you got to write a book about this. We had books on the table last time. We have some now today as well. Here are some of my gaming books, and so like one of my sort of, it's not hidden, it's in the open. My objectives here is to someday get Bjorn to write the book, or at least have someone write it about him, because this is like a story that, I mean, there's millions, hundreds of millions, arguably, at least tens of millions of people all around the world who have, like, this is a part of their childhood. And I am born in the early 80s, and this generation is sometimes called like the first lifelong gamer generation, that people play games, electronic games, and they keep playing them throughout adulthood. And that has not always been the case. Like when I was a kid in the 90s playing games, that was not something which my dad did, or that he encouraged, rather the opposite. But today, like, we have the gaming dads and moms who encourage their kids to do these things, and that is interesting. And what does this have to do with books? Well, like the story of Toca Boca, there are different stories of games in the past. Like this is a really good book about the Doom. I don't know if any of you have read it, Masters of Doom. It's about the two Johns, like one who is like a punky hard rock character, and another more different. But it's a very interesting story about how the game is made, both like the technological thing, like they are the first to make this in the Castle Wolfenstein, when you like the screen scrolls, so that you have your, like, it's everywhere, but it was not everywhere before they made it technically possible. The game engine is novel, but it's also Wolfenstein is also the first time a company made the shareware model work. You know, the share, if you remember shareware, that you give away the game for free, like 10 levels, but then you can mail money to somewhere in US, and they will send you 20 more levels. And that is
on a diskette.
On a diskette. And it really worked for them. They sort of broke that. People actually bought it. So this is very interesting also from like a business software history standpoint. So and this book, I think it's written in the I never played Doom, my brother did, but this book is from the early 2000s. I read it like a couple of years ago when I realized it existed. And that is the thing with the gaming books. Like, people don't read books about gaming companies when they are 10, 15, 20, 25. But they do when they're 40 and 50 and 60 and 70. I mean, it's an expanding market. And and I remember last year I was so into this. Like, this is a book about the war between Sega and Nintendo and the gaming console for a couple of years. Like, and they got access to all the people who are involved, and it's super interesting. And I read it like 10, 15 years after it's written, and I will recommend it throughout my whole life to anyone who was into Sega and Nintendo. So like the market, the long tail is very long. And you can see here where we go with Toca Boca. I mean, if Björn writes this book about like how was Toca Boca made, he might get some readers now, but he will also have a readership in like 20 years globally of like, how was this made? And they will see a book with the cover of Toca Boca. Oh, I remember that. That was fun. Oh, it was people who did it, and they did it for a reason. So that is sort of...
I mean, the whole category sort of acknowledges gaming as a culture,
Yeah.
in a sense, which isn't traditionally the way it's been seen. Like
No.
you say, that's kind of a new phenomenon, that you actually look upon gaming as a part of popular culture at all, as opposed to just a waste of time, which I think a lot of people look at it, or just a pastime, if nothing else, where you're doing something instead of what you really should be doing. But there is actually something more to it, which I think these books are good examples.
And I mean, and in a whole like this, like the first-person shooter thing, I mean, with NVIDIA, I mean, that wouldn't exist without that thing. So these things are not... They are not just fringe phenomenon. Many of these things are very cutting edge. Like, what do people actually do with computers? I read this book earlier over the spring about the Apple II computer. I don't know if anyone of you had an Apple II, but this is about how the microcomputers that emerged commercially in 1977, who they, over like the first, say, 3, 4, 5 years, become personal computers and branded as personal computers, as something that people use. And this is written like through the software that actually is used. So it's a one chapter about VisiCalc, the precursor to Excel, which is like the first business application people actually buy. And then they buy the computer so they can use VisiCalc. And I don't know, but it's in, say, 1980s, 1981 or something like that. And then there are some games and stuff like that. But this is like an important history, because these things are very fringe at the time, but they are certainly not fringe now, and nothing, I would say, points to that this will be fringe in the future. So this is like, if you want to write like a really good history of like the late 20th and early 21st century, I mean, software is eating that world. And it is right now where the people who were part of that revolution are alive, and you can get into them, you can interview them, you can deep dive into it. Like the things that will be captured over the coming like decades. That is what the future will know about this period. And therefore I think the Toca Boca thing is interesting also because, of course, I think it's an interesting phenomena. But then there is one problem with this, that Toca Boca, it's not a game, Björn, right?
Well, this was part of this sort of research project. We're trying to establish, is this going to be a game? Because what are people doing then with these new devices? What are they doing? They're spending some time reading books on these devices. Doesn't work super well, but they're doing it somewhat. But they're also playing a lot of games. And kids are doing whatever's available, which wasn't that much at the time. This is just when the iPad came out. We actually had the first iPad in Sweden. We had sent to us with a man from Apple coming and putting it in a plexiglass box and chaining it to a radiator on Sveavägen in Stockholm. That was the first iPad in Stockholm prior to the iPad ever being released, where we were building this magazine thing. So we'd seen it, we knew it existed, and then as soon as it came out, no one really knew, well, what are they actually going to do with it then? It's a big iPhone, that's what it kind of looks like. Well, what's the actual usage? And gaming was one part. But then we went back, so sort of since this was an R&D team at the time, we could take some time and think about it and not do the leanest startup possible. We actually spent about 4 months doing research of sort of what could we do? And one of the things that we then brought up was, well, let's look at how kids play, as opposed to looking at gaming specifically. Let's look at play, and gaming is a sort of it's a subsidiary almost of play. Play is the sort of the highest form, and then gaming is, like some of these books are showing, is a way of playing, but there are many others. So I had a book which I looked for, which I could not find. It's in one of the many bookshelves at home, called The Right Stuff, it's called. And it's from the National Association of Young Education and something. It's sort of an official American thing. And what it had in it was a structured take on different ways that children can play. And that's kind of how we started. And the first one is active play, which is playing sports, chasing each other around, that sort of thing. This is a category that does not digitize very well for obvious reasons. A lot of people have tried, just like running around with a device. It's almost always in the way of the fun. It doesn't contribute to the fun. In theory it could, but it probably doesn't. Pokemon Go being an example of something where it actually does contribute to you moving around the world, but it's a very unusual category. So that one we kind of ruled out. We can't really do that very well. Then you have make-believe play, which is more imagination and storytelling and things of that nature. We went quite deep into that one. We thought this has potential. This is more doll houses. That house isn't really doing anything. You're doing it. The kid is the one participating. Everything that is fun about a dollhouse is because you're thinking of it. It's not because the dollhouse is doing anything for you, because it's completely static. And even on a screen, it doesn't really need to do much. It just needs to facilitate the way that you're thinking and how you're thinking about these things. And that worked really well. So we looked at that. So there's active play, make-believe play. There's manipulative play, which is more construction, Lego, building blocks, that kind of stuff. Then there's creative play, which is arts and crafts, drawing, music. And then there's learning play in this definition. And learning play is where books and games is, because you learn how to go through it. There's a linearity to it. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you look at that, you take this model and you say, okay, the research sort of implies that kids like all types of playing. Different ages, different stages. Some are leaning a little bit into one thing, some are leaning a little bit to the other. But generally speaking, all kids like all five ways of playing. But when you take that and then you compare that to the App Store, which was essentially what's available, what's on offer in this, almost everything was in games and books. That was the only thing. And that, we thought, at least at the time, the hypothesis was that's how adults play. That's how we liked it. We don't play with doll houses maybe as much as we should. It's very easy when designing for someone who's not you to think, well, what would I like? Which sometimes can work, but in this category for children, it absolutely leads you down the wrong way. And it led everybody in the market to let's do games and let's do books. And our hypothesis was, let's do the opposite of that. Let's not do that. So we weren't actually doing games. We were rather saying, let's make digital toys. Let's make something you can play with, something that you cannot win, you cannot lose. It's completely frustration-free, and it has no rules, because the rules are whatever you've decided it to be. And this turned out to be a almost completely empty field where no one was.
And this relates back to what we talked about like a couple of weeks ago here when we spoke about Peter Thiel and 0 to 1, that you should sort of do the things that others are not doing.
Yeah.
What valuable companies nobody building. What fun way of playing with an iPad is nobody pursuing. So that is sort of this, like to not search for competition, but rather search for empty places, blank spaces. Avoid competition. Go somewhere else. And this is like things you do for in various ways, I mean, which we'll get back to. But the first thing here is like, what are we doing? It's not a game, it's a toy. And the second question then is, of course, which you start to think of, okay, in which ways would a digital toy be better than a physical toy? Could a dollhouse be more fun on a screen than in reality? Do you have any examples of things?
I mean, we explored many different areas to kind of see. We took almost, if you look at the early products that we were making, they were all coming out of also a book. I could have brought that one too, the Blockbuster toy, for instance, which is essentially looking at historical toys and why they worked so well. So Monopoly came out 1934, I think, and the teddy bears in 1903. Nothing much has happened to those. Monopoly is still played the same way as it was when it came out. You can buy different editions and fancy stuff, but it's essentially the same thing. And the reason for that being, kids have not changed fundamentally in that amount of time. A 3-year-old now finds the same thing fun as they did in the 30s, essentially. Other things have changed, but a 3-year-old is a 3-year-old and is likely to be so over a long period of time too. So there were you can sort of distill, like, this is obviously something that for a very long time kids have found fun. So can we borrow some of that, knowing that the behavior is probably, they've never done it on an iPad, but they've done it before. Can we move that to an iPad and make it make sense for that? This is how Toca Tea Party comes to play, which is the first kind of tea set, which is just an iPad, which we have, and you place little cupcakes and tea things on the iPad, and then you sit around it, you play with either with yourself, or like you did with your kids and their grandmother, or just with a teddy bear or something like that. And what we found out when we played with this is again, the opposite of maybe what a parent would think was interesting. So when a parent does it, you kind of want to do it, and you sort of, you set it all up, and then you want to be done with it. And when the kids do it, the most fun thing about a tea party, which is better with an iPad, is spilling. The spilling of juice and coffee is so much more fun for a kid than for a parent, because if you do it in real life, you know what happens, you've got to clean it up. On the iPad, this is a self-cleaning thing. So we designed to increase the spilling frequency enormously. You'll try, you could try playing this game and not spilling. It's basically impossible, because the spilling frequency is artificially enhanced, that every time you play it, you're going to spill multiple times. And then you take a piece of paper and you clean it up, which for a kid, if you're 4 or 5, is super fun there and then, but for an adult is a nightmare in reality. So this is an example of, like, in this particular context, the iPad is actually doing something that the regular life cannot do. And then of course you have the context as well, like you're doing it in the backseat of a car. It's tricky to have a tea set in the backseat of a car. It's impractical. That doesn't mean it's replacing it. It just means under those particular circumstances, this form of play is better now and then. But that, of course, many other categories, it's not. And we failed on multiple occasions trying to get that right. Where it's just like, this is just not fun enough. This is fun in real life, but it's just not fun here. And we had to give up a lot of those projects too.
For how long did you sort of do these stops and starts? Like, when did you release the first tea party?
It was very, very, very fast. Once we started in January 2011. 15th of March, we released the 2 first products. So in 2.5 months, we had 2 products out. We released 10 products over the course of the year. It was extremely rapid because it was, it was fertile ground. Nothing out there, basically. Originally we thought we were too late. We tried to acquire a company and realized these are 2 French guys in a basement. Like, there's nothing to acquire here. They're hardly doing anything. We realized we're not actually super late in the market. We're actually extremely early. So maybe we can do this. So we get these out quickly, and the idea being we need to try a lot of these different play patterns to see what makes sense in this context, and some of them did and some of them did not. But over the course of 2011, we released 10 different products, 10 different toys, and one being the blowout success, Toca Hair Salon, which sort of kind of turned the whole company due to its sudden success.
What made it so successful?
This is coming again. If you go back to old toy catalogs, which is where all these ideas came from, Toca Hair Salon is a mannequin doll. That's what it is. It's a styling of a mannequin doll, but it has a feature which the mannequin doll does not have, which is you can cut the hair, which you can do on a mannequin doll, but it's a one-way street, because once you cut the hair of a mannequin doll, it's gone, and it looks like me. And then in this particular case, you can grow it back, which is a miracle that I have yet to find. But it works. In the app, you can just grow the hair back, which means you can cut it, and then you can grow it back. This is better than a mannequin doll. Again, at this specific thing. It lacks other things. Oh. It lacks kind of the sensibilities. You can't touch the hair. It's not feel like that. But we spent so much time doing the first finger swipe needs to feel, and it is a sound like you're cutting it. The first swipe, it's got to be fun from the first swipe. And if it's not, and we spent considerable time getting this right, hair physics is something I can't tell you how many hours I spent on hair physics, because that is the thing. We knew mannequin dolls were fun, because again, it's been around for ages. It's still selling really well today. It's an established play pattern. But what's fun on the screen? And that's the cutting of the hair, the regrowing of the hair. That is the fun part. And this kind of really, really took off.
And how did you get a user base for it? Well, why did my grandmother download it and let my kid play with it?
This was complicated, but at the time, again, this is a playbook that would not work now. But at the time, we need to remember that new apps were an exciting thing. It's obviously the least exciting thing you could imagine. Now someone saying, we released a new app, and everybody shrugs, like, all right. It's not, but then it was an exciting new thing, so that helped a little bit. We used...
So you got media coverage?
A little bit. That didn't help enormously, but we were doing... it was very early days in the App Store, and we started to form a relationship with Apple, which is what was the foundation for moving to America and Silicon Valley, because we realized that the owner of the store, which was Apple in this case, whatever we're doing, and my God, we tried a lot of things, doesn't matter what we were doing, if they were doing the equivalent, it was going to have a 100,000x multiplier of whatever I could be doing. And this took a while to figure that one out, because I thought it can't be that hard. There's got to be ways we can do this. It turns out, no, there is no way we can. Not in any sort of feasible way. But if you get Apple on your side, then it works. And then this was an issue because at the time, Apple didn't have any representation in Sweden other than selling computers. So they didn't have software representation. So we had to go and meet someone in London, who in their turn had to pitch us to Cupertino. This is never going to work. I got to go to London all the time and try to convince this guy to sell my company on behalf of me. That's just, and everyone else is doing the same thing. So this was kind of a Muhammad in the mountain situation. It's like, they're never going to come to me. I need to go to them instead. And this is what laid the foundation work after just over a year to say, we got to get out of Sweden immediately and go to Silicon Valley and try to figure this out.
So you moved in 2012?
2012.
Yeah.
We moved and set up what we called our head office, which was only me. Because then we could tell Apple, now we have our American head office, and therefore we need American representation. You need to see us because we're an American company now, because 99% of the staff is still in Sweden.
But you were still owned by Bonnier as a subsidiary.
Yes, Bonnier was very confused at this point of time.
Yeah.
Extremely confused, because there was initial traction, but there was something, but they never asked for this.
No.
So they didn't really know what on earth we were doing.
Yeah, they wondered, are you going to sell our magazines or not?
Exactly. What's going on with the magazine? Are we getting to the magazine part anytime soon?
Yeah. So, were you afraid of competition at this stage? Because I mean, technically, I'd suppose that were these things hard to do? If, say, Apple had wanted to make a Toca Boca clone in 2012, how long would it have taken them?
It would have been very easy for them to do. And worse, we were worried about Disney. We were worried about Nickelodeon. And part of the reason for going to America was like, we should be able to recruit people who are better at this than we are, which was a low bar because we knew nothing at the time. So we should be able to find professionals, bring them in, and then they'll professionalize the company for us, and this will kind of work. That wasn't how it panned out, because they didn't do it anyway. But it turned out that and this is, I think, is a lesson to be learned, that the barrier of entry was not the difficulty of it, because it wasn't that hard. And even if you look at the products today, they're still being played. Toca Boca has been downloaded over 1 billion times in the world. So it's a very substantial thing. But it's extremely simple. It's deceivingly simple. So there's nothing in the technical complexity that hinders people from entering, but rather it was a definition of the market. Because the kids app market lives sort of in no man's land. It is related to 4 different industries, and neither of these 4 industries consider this to be what they should be doing. So it's the gaming industry, which I don't know how many of you are from gaming, but kids games is the least cool thing you can do in the gaming industry. Nobody wants to do kids games. It exists as a subgenre, but it's never the focus of anything. So it's on some slight periphery of the gaming market. Then you have the entertainment market, which is the Disneys and the Nickelodeons, but they're focused on film. They're focused on movies and television and stuff like that. And they do some interactive stuff, but it's normally like on the marketing quota. So that touches it. And then you have education, which in America is anything to do with children, even it has no educational value whatsoever. But they gamify some of their content, but that's a lot of sort of ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. They're not really doing products that kids love. They're just doing another way of learning math. And then we've got the technology companies, then Apple and Google, which sort of, we could, but we have a lot of other things to do. Yeah. In between these 4 gigantic businesses is no man's land. Yeah. Which is where we were. Yeah. So our main advantage was we looked at small pieces of these 4 areas that all 4 of them considered to be not big enough to be worth doing, and saying together it probably is worth doing, and that proved to be true. And
the toy industry?
Exactly.
Is it nowhere in there, or is that just like
we tried to deal with them. I actually met the Toy Association at I went to Toy Fair thinking, I'm going to find my kin here because we're all making toys. It makes sense. So I met the Toy Association thinking that we could do something cool together. It turns out the Toy Association is a lobby group that only lobbies to allow cheaper plastics to be molded, which was very depressing. But that's what they do. It's just like if we can allow this partly carcinogenic plastic to be allowed to sell to kids, we can increase our margins, and that was their primary concern. So we did not deal with them very much after that. But they weren't really interested because they're selling plastic. That's what they're doing. Primarily.
But the interesting thing here is like we touch upon here is that it is a blank spot. It's a small margin, and it's also not that high regarded as it's just kids. But then earlier you spoke about this, like the kids still play with teddy bears. The kids still play with mannequin dolls. So like the toys that succeed, if you go back to the books, like if you make a toy which a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old like, then very likely like in 100 years time, the kids who are born then, they will also find this fun.
Yeah.
And this is like very different from a AAA game, for example.
Extremely different. We didn't really understand the full kind of knowledge of that until we'd done it for a while. Because this is actually this is a factor that plays on two horizons. It's both time and geography. It turns out, again, if you do something which is fun, again to the Monopoly example, Monopoly still fun today. It's almost, it's very old, but it's still very fun because it touches upon some things that are fun. It's the same thing here. So what you have when you go for kids as a target group in this case, which again was a little bit of a surprise, but it made sense, is 5-year-olds are the same. Next year, a 5-year-old is the same as the year before, and next year again. So you grow out of it because you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. Your kids probably don't play as much Toca Boca as they once did, but there's another generation growing into it because they're going to pass through the same stage. So this is very interesting. So that means you're almost cutting out a part of time. It's like I'm cutting out the 5-year-olds. It's not the same 5-year-old, but it's the same 5-year-olds moving through these stages all the time. And this was very useful, which meant we could make something that you naturally grow into, you naturally grow out of, but it has an forever rolling target group. There's always going to be 5-year-olds, no matter what. And that also turned out to be true geographically. On the other end of things, it turns out like a Saudi Arabian 5-year-old is extremely similar to a Japanese 5-year-old, because if you put them in the same room with the same stuff, they're probably going to hang out and have a lot of fun. Whereas if you put a 25-year-old from these respective countries, they're going to say, I know nothing about this. I don't know. They're completely different people because cultural context has been added, other things have happened. You start very closely, and then as you grow up, other factors come into play. So this, I think, was overlooked by the gaming industry because you always want to make the coolest new things, the latest games. But a 25-year-old today is not playing the same game as a 25-year-old did 10 years ago. But a 5-year-old is. And that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference in the whole way that you think about how to design these products and also how to create a sustaining business. It's changed a lot, Toca Boca lately, but before we used to make 85% of our revenue of things that we hadn't touched that year. Just products that because they didn't have to be updated like a live game because they were already good. The Tea Party was already good if you like it.
And perhaps even the opposite. I mean, like these games, they channel through generations. Like my grandmother, my kid's grandmother. I mean, we have a 5-year-old now who's playing Toca World. I mean, she already know that. 5-year-olds like this, so I'll hand this to her. So like you have this like the social or the network effects of it that like replicates. And that you're the one who has grown out of it, sooner or later they will have nostalgia for this, and they'll introduce I introduce it to their smaller siblings or to their own children in 20 years time. Arguably, like if that works, I mean, you can of course compare it to Disney as well. Like they also have these characters who are like intra-generational.
I mean, it's too early to tell, but in theory, yes, because Lego's the same. Like there is plenty of examples of where your own Lego gets passed down to your kids. It's not exactly the same thing, but the basic idea of the Lego is the same. It's that, and it can still work. And once you sort of cross that generational chasm, you're almost set because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not 100%, but it's a good start because you have the brand recognition. It's like, I've seen that. I recognize this thing.
And the competition is not very fierce. Because a lot of people who are into these kind of things and want to push it forward, what would I enjoy? Or what would another adult to enjoy.
Yep.
So therefore, I mean, this void. I think that's very interesting in the story, and it's so obvious when you see it from in hindsight, and it's obvious when I'm speaking to you, and I mean, I listen to interviews and stuff. But I mean, of course, it's not obvious in 2009 even that this is a toy. This is a toy store when you have the iPad. I remember the professors when I was in doctoral school. They sat there, and those who were like early adopters, they had an iPad instead of a white sheet of paper like I did.
Yeah.
But like, I remember passing things back. But one final thing, I mean, about this differentiation thing, how did you try to differentiate so that you would be hard to compete with, or did you think about these things?
Yeah, no, we were obviously concerned. It felt like we were chased, it was like, right, we got 6 months ahead of Disney, but it's only a matter of time before they do this. And now, 10 years later, they're still not doing it, or more than 10 years later, they're still not doing it. So that was wrong, although that proved to be a very good incentive to keep the tempo going, because you felt like, we're only one product away from someone absolutely crushing us, because it seemed unreasonable throughout this whole time. It's like, why is Disney not doing this? It would be so easy for them. Why is Sesame Street not doing this? Why is Nickelodeon not doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Why are they leaving, in this case, two bald guys that knew nothing about this whatsoever, had no history in game making whatsoever? How are we allowed to keep owning this space where there's all these giants around it? But that then led us to thinking, well, we got to differentiate and do something in a different way to at least give us, nothing else, the perception of a little bit more sort of space. So this is where we started talking about, like, we can't out Disney. So we're sort of like, the strategy becomes the reverse of whatever we thought that the competitors could do. So it was almost a filter, thinking, would Disney do this? And if the answer is yes, then we have to do the opposite, because we can never afford to be in the same market as them. If Disney thinks, we should do an ABC 123 app, then the chances are they're going to spend 100 times more money, and it's going to have IP that we can never compete with, and it's going to be Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these things, and it's going to be impossible to compete with. So the answer is, do not compete. Do not, under any circumstances, compete with the companies that have so much more resources than you, and instead do something completely different. So what we did then, in the example of the hair salon, would be the obvious mannequin doll would be a Barbie-like girl of some sort, because that's what mannequin dolls traditionally look like. That would be very easy for Disney to do. Super easy. They would make sort of, princess hair salon, something, which they did a few years later. Our hair salon, I don't know how many of you have played it, it looks weird. It looks really weird, but the design choices were extremely intentional to be, this under no circumstances could ever be confused with being Disney. And Disney would never do this, because this is as far from princesses as you could possibly imagine. They look androgynous. There's a dog in there. There's all manner of things, going to the hair salon. Nothing about this is Disney. But we knew they wouldn't do that. So if it became a very kind of simplistic, but actually quite functional way of designing strategies. Like, if you think that your competitors would go down this road, go down the other road, and then just don't even attempt to do it, because they will crush you on resources alone. That actually served us surprisingly well, even if they, and the products that did come out, Princess Hair Salon, did an order of magnitude worse than our product, despite having the right IP and everything. So there were other forces at play.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And of course, it's also, maybe we have to touch some about the financial part as well, because like a lot of software, as we spoke of last time, we spoke a lot of like the software companies who like play very long games where they have like large deficits for a long time, and then they turn to green, Spotify or something like that. Like just very late in like you capture the whole market, and then you monetize. But like Toca Boca was, as I understood it, was profitable almost at least from the hair salon.
It was, we had to be profitable, because otherwise Borneo would have cancelled us. This was pure necessity. So we wouldn't, this was the circumstances that we had that everybody else did not have. And this was probably a saving grace in this particular case. This wasn't Bonnier's strategy. It's just like, I knew them because I used to work there, and I know what they're like, and I knew if we don't make money extremely quickly, then this is going to end up on the failed heap of R&D projects along with everything else that I've been doing before, magazines and whatnot. So this is only a matter of time before they cancel us. So I knew we have to make money extremely fast, even if I disagreed with that. I disagreed with it, and I thought, this doesn't... I wanted to do what you were saying. I wanted to, like, let's just go free, let's take over the world, and then we'll figure out the money later. But I knew, like, that was not an opportunity for me. Like, that was never going to be a strategy that we could take. So it forced upon making money quite quickly. So we all the money we lost in the first year, we made back within 2 months afterwards. And when the company was sold, we were cash flow positive for Bonnier, including all the investment, because it's sold to a toy company many years later. But by that time, Bonnier had made all the money it had invested in the first year, and subsequently it had made it back in cash flow. So they were up even if they hadn't sold us. But that was a necessity at the time, which led to, I won't sugarcoat it, considerable frustration and a lot of fights with the Bonnier management. But it was sort of healthy in a sense, and it led to this kind of contrarian strategy, because I couldn't do what everyone else thought I should be doing, because that wasn't available to me.
Yeah, it was like a blessing in disguise to have...
in some way.
And you had to lean into what you could lean into.
It's a very generous way of calling it a blessing, but I suppose that wasn't how it felt at the time. But when I look at it now, there were a lot of things about this very odd setup that actually played in our favor that I wasn't fully appreciative of at the time.
It's super interesting. I mean, we can be talking about this for ages, I think. And when did it stop? When did you leave the company? When was it sold, and when did you leave the company?
We sold it eventually because Bonnier got confused about us starting to lose money. This is and we lost money because they had approved us to do it, but they sort of forgot that they'd approved it, and they were like, what's going on here? We're losing money. It's like, no, we're investing money. That's not the same thing, but it looks the same. It looks like a red figure, but it is actually a difference between losing money and investing money. This became enormously confusing. And at some point, I think they just said, I don't know what we're doing here.
Too hard.
We didn't even ask for this company. We now have this odd game toy thing in Silicon Valley, and we don't know what we're doing. Let's just get rid of this. So they sold it. In a hellish process that took 1.5 years of me flying around the world trying to sell this company, which was not prepared to be sold, because I didn't know we were for sale, but someone let me know that apparently it was, and it was my job to do it. So we had to go on this tour, try to sell this thing. In 2016, I think it was late 2015 or 2016, we sold it to a Canadian toy company which owns it today, called Spin Master, which is just like Mattel or Hasbro, anything like that. It's just a similar sort of idea. They bought it. They're still running it. They're still the owner today. It has become, since I left in 2017, so I was there maybe 1.5 years to sort of hand it over and everything. It has become exponentially more popular and successful since I left, which should tell you something. It's very good for me now, but unfortunately I have very little to take credit for this, because it now makes more than twice as much in profit than the whole company sold for in one single year. It is extremely successful in the world. It was successful then proportionately, but now it is demonstrably very successful in the world, and lives... it still has offices in Stockholm. It still has employees in San Francisco, and belongs to this corporate toy giant called Spin Master.
Super fascinating, Björn.
Yes, some questions?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Benny, and when I'm not here, I run an IT consultancy company. So, full disclaimer, I know David since over 20 years, and I know you love books, so do I. For people that doesn't love books, much of this is also available as documentaries and streaming services. Might be more accessible. I might come out as harsh, but I hope all of these changes happened after your time. So let's see. Firstly, the passback effect, I think, is something that have been going on for quite a while, right? You mentioned personal computers, it's the same thing. I would include in books Emil Wilhelmsson, Local Guy Malmö, and Generation 64. But the thing is, I'm a gaming dad. I'm also part of this 80s generation, and I love for my kids to become gamers. That's why I discourage them from Toca Boca. So that's obviously
Because it's not gaming enough for you, or
exactly. First of all, it's on a device that I think is a very bad product. iPad is something that is bad at everything. It's just it's a bad phone, it's a bad computer, it's a bad TV. But a lot of people bought them, and they are very expensive. So it's kind of the sunken cost phenomenon. So that's why I pass it back to the kids. I bought this highly expensive thing that I can't use for anything. It's super bad for books, super bad for watching Netflix. I give it to my kid. And secondly, I think that what Toca Boca offers to my kids are obviously creative play without rules, and I love all of these kind of things. But from my perspective, it's diminishing because you're not able to put that extra cup there, which you could, playing freely, you could take anything. So now we have this as well, and that's creative for me. Yeah.
no, it's a fair point. I think just a comment on the device. I think what was the revolutionary part was the device. Because I agree, it's a bad magazine reader, obviously, because we failed on that one as well. That it's a bad many of these things. But what is good about it is the touchscreen. And that was something that they did not have. That allowed the interface for younger children. Now, Toca Boca has changed in age over time, but when it started, the touchscreen was the game changer. I agree, it's not a super great computing device, but the touchscreen was something which was very new at the time. Obviously, now there's a lot of iPhones and iPads that have been around for so long, so they've kind of gone through many generations. But at the time, that was... The mouse is very unintuitive for young children. You want something to go up on a screen, you push it forward. That makes no sense to a kid, but pushing it makes a lot of sense. So that was the just on the device. And on the other end, I think it's a fair point saying it still has limitations. It's not, you can make up, this looks like a book, but it could be a phone if I hold it like this and I talk in it, and that's true. I think this is more a time and a place, where like there are circumstances where that type of completely free creativity is not available, and there are also circumstances where what happens on the screen is difficult to replicate in real world, but it is in no way intended as, or I think it's ever really become a replacement for anything else. So there is a time and a place, and I think it should be used appropriately in that, and it's certainly not playing Toca Tea Party does not mean you shouldn't have a real one, so to speak. That is the wrong way of thinking about it. But on an aeroplane, maybe this is more convenient than stacking up cups on a seat, for instance.
Hi, my name is Clara. I have a bachelor's in animation, and I'm currently studying for my MBA in finance. And I recently moved from the U.S. From Massachusetts. So hello.
Lovely.
Hi. My question is because I'm trying to learn more about business in Sweden versus the U.S. I mean, obviously Silicon Valley has a lot of resources, so I was wondering if you knew anything about like the differences in resources between Sweden and the US, and if you feel like there are things that are easier to do nowadays or harder to do nowadays when it comes to like, starting a business, especially in gaming, right?
I mean, I think we had a very specific circumstances, obviously in this case. What was obvious, I felt, was how similar it was, remarkably similar. You can play the venture capital game, and then there's a proximity issue, how close you are to capital. Sweden, compared to many other European countries, has a very developed venture capital market, comparatively speaking. If you look at it compared to the amount of money flowing here versus Silicon Valley, then everything looks bad. Everything in the whole world looks bad compared to that. So if we take that out of the equation temporarily, it looks pretty similar. And running the companies, we ran into the same, kind of cross-cultural issues as everyone does, which was not so much like a structural problem for us more than anybody else. I think it's something I thought of, which was a problem, which I think a lot of people run into, was I'm half English. So I speak the language. I've been to America 20 times, probably over the last, I went there and I felt, I got this. And then you get there, and then you realize, I have not got this at all. I don't know anything of this. Because I went in thinking that I understood this market a lot more. So that caused me to have to go back and redo a lot of things, whereas if I'd moved to Malaysia, I would have said, I know nothing about Malaysia, and I would have gone in softer. And I thought, America, how hard can it be? And it turns out it can be very hard. And this led to a lot of trouble between running the companies. But if you sort of disregard these sort of obvious cultural issues that appeared, it's surprisingly similar. Surprisingly similar. And it's not, I didn't feel like even the sort of the context of setting up gaming companies in the US was significantly different than it was here. I thought it was going to be much worse, but it was not. It was surprisingly appealing to us. And again, this is now an extremely recognized and globally leading company, but it started from two guys in Sweden having never made a single game ever. That's where not that long ago. And if the market was so cutthroat in the US as maybe one can perceive it to be sometimes, that would not be possible. But it clearly is. It could have been a lot of luck, and it probably was in many aspects. But it's possible. And maybe sometimes the view you get is that it isn't.
Hey, my name is Monica. I come from a very different field. I come from biomedicine, but it doesn't matter. I wanted to know about that. Nowadays, especially, there's a lot of talk about how you don't necessarily want to imprint certain things on very young kids, like especially with Disney and Disney movies and stuff. And I wanted to ask, did you, while you were developing these games, also think a lot about, for example, are there certain games you develop that are more for boys or more for girls? Or did you think about, just in general, how can we prevent to imprint too much or too little? Or was that not such a point at that time? Or
It was very much a point, and this played a two-pronged approach. This was part of the out Disney. You can't out Disney. Disney clearly has an idea where they're going with a lot of their IP. So this was also like, well, we can't win at that. We can't win at the princess game because that is a different battle. So our starting point was almost always like that we should not be excluding anyone. And it went to extensive lengths trying not to gendering it so much. I think a lot of the gendering was in the parents' minds as opposed to the kids' minds. You would have thought that maybe the hair salon was very female skewed because that's where the mannequin doll traditionally was. On the data that we had at the time, it was extremely balanced. Something like 55 to 45, something like that. It was much, much more balanced than one would have thought. So a lot of the hindrances was not sort of making a product that any kid would like under other circumstances. It was getting past the parental barrier that said, my kid doesn't like this. And like, you'd be amazed. But you're not going to give them a chance to participate in it, and therefore this is going to fall into these categories anyway. It has very little to do with the product. So you can change the product to a certain degree, but then if the parent has decided, my kid only likes building, then that's a tricky sell, because who am I to say that I know your kid better than you do? Like, why would, and I don't know. So there's a very tricky thing to do. But this is sometimes we compare the kids market to the pet market, because the user is one and the customer is another, and that is a very unusual use case to design for or sell to. Same thing with the dog food. Like the dog is the user. The dog is eating, but you're the pet owner, you're buying it. You don't know if the dog really loves this or not. He's eating it, but would he rather try something else? I don't know, maybe, but it seems happy enough as he's eating the food. This is a very unusual use case, because normally you can think, well, what would I do? Again, and that's where we started. It's like, well, what you do is probably the wrong thing, because you don't know what it's like to be a kid, but you are a parental barrier that sometimes helps and sometimes actually forces your kids down a route that they might not have taken had you not been in the way. You can't avoid it, obviously. I mean, you don't want to build direct channels just to kids and circumvent parents. That's not what you want to do, and it wouldn't be realistic to think that you could, even if you wanted to. But you just need to think about, what do I need to tell the kids versus what do I need to tell the parents, which at times, and in certain markets, America in particular, was two extremely different things. Because in America, we were always, I'd say, I make apps. And then they'd say, educational apps. And in the end, at first it's like, no, it's actually more nuanced, it's more like digital toy, and in the end, like, yeah, exactly, educational apps. Because it's not, but it was because anything to do with children was automatically seen as education. And that and that was the parental bias. And I couldn't, in trying to convince them that it was a waste of time. But once the kid had it in their hand, you could tell, is this for them or not? And it varied. Sometimes yes and sometimes no.
Was there a discussion on like addictiveness and like in-game buying? Because like Toca World is a lot about like in-game buying. Like the first ones, was that a living discussion? Or
it's very living. Originally, it is now, but it never was. Originally, there was a lot of problems with over-purchasing. This was before all the sort of security measures were on the devices. You could buy, for hundreds of dollars just by tapping it very, very rapidly. That doesn't work anymore, but that used to work when it was an underdeveloped ecosystem. So that we were trying to avoid entirely for very, very many years. And then the other part of the addictiveness is like, since it's a toy, the idea was you're supposed to put it down and you could come back to it an hour later and nothing had happened. Whereas in a game, there's timers and there's high scores, and now there's also social components where you're playing Roblox. I'm playing Roblox with someone else. So if I leave now, I'm letting my the friends down. Whereas Toca Boca was sort of, you could put it down, you could leave it for 5 minutes, an hour, a day, pick it up, nothing has happened. It is exactly the same as the toy, the physical toy. You put the doll down, pick the doll back up again. It's the same thing. That was an intentional design decision to try to limit this. And you could do other things as well. There were things that were designed intentionally to kind of have a close. Toca House, for instance, was sort of like the sun sets after a certain amount of time, which is a natural point to say it's time to cut it. You can play it again, but it's a natural point to kind of close it. I'll play it until the sun sets, which is within 3 or 4 minutes, and then you come naturally, and that was designed for that purpose. Because again, you live in this context, whether you're wanting to design from that perspective or not, that's where everybody's minds go, which is a very realistic thing. I think about this for my own kids, obviously. Why are they designing these products in this way? Why are they having a hard time giving them away and whatnot? But you don't know that, and they don't know our intentions either, so you have to show it in the product rather than talk about it. I think we're running out of time, but this is this has been a fun conversation. This was the second out of 3. Next time we're going to bring a few more books, but also bring some sort of tangible things that you can bring and I think learn from. This was sort of a case study in how to run things in Silicon Valley in a somewhat contrarian manner, but there are many other lessons to be learned that we think we can bring, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. See you in a few weeks.